Just recently, the iPhone 17 series was released. But have you ever wondered about the story behind the iPhone, the best-selling device of all time? Today, let's go back to where it all began, with the man who changed technology forever, Steve Jobs. If you enjoy inspiring stories and want to improve your English, don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey. Part 1: A Difficult Beginning. Steve Jobs was born on February 24, 1955, in San Francisco, California. From the very start, his life was not easy. His real parents were very young and not ready to take care of a baby. So, they decided to give him up for adoption. This was not Steve's choice, but it became the first big event in his life. A couple named Paul and Clara Jobs adopted him. They were not rich, but they gave Steve something more important: love, care, and a safe home. Paul worked as a mechanic. He loved fixing cars and machines. Clara was an accountant. Together, they taught Steve that life was not about money, but about effort, honesty, and hard work. Steve grew up in Mountain View, California, which later became part of Silicon Valley. From a young age, Steve was very curious. While other children played outside, Steve asked questions about everything. He wanted to know why machines moved, how radios worked, and what happened if he took things apart. His father Paul noticed this and decided to teach him. Together, they spent hours in the garage, fixing cars, and making small gadgets. Paul told Steve, "If you build something, make it the best. Pay attention to every detail." This advice stayed in Steve's mind forever and later became part of his success. But Steve was not a perfect student. In fact, he was often bored at school. Teachers said that the lessons were too easy for him. He was very smart but also playful. Sometimes he made jokes and pranks, even building a small explosive prank once. At age 10, his family moved to Los Altos, California. There, Steve saw his first computer. It was huge, the size of a room. But Steve was fascinated. He thought, "This machine can solve problems. What else can it do?" This moment started his love for technology. In high school, Steve met a young man named Steve Wozniak, or Woz. Woz was very good with electronics. He could build amazing things from simple parts. Steve and Woz became close friends. They shared a dream: to use technology to make life better. Their first invention together was the Blue Box, a device that let people make free long-distance phone calls. It was not legal, but it showed how bold and creative they were. Later, Jobs said, "Without the Blue Box, there would be no Apple." After high school, Steve went to Reed College in Oregon. But he did not stay long. After 6 months, he dropped out. He felt that college was not teaching him what he wanted to know. He also did not want to waste his parents' money. But he did not stop learning. He stayed on campus and attended the classes he liked. One of them was calligraphy. At that time, it looked useless. Why learn about handwriting and fonts? But years later, when he created the Macintosh computer, the fonts from that class became very important. This story shows us something: never stop learning. You never know when something small will become useful in the future. In 1974, Steve traveled to India. He was searching for more than money or success. He wanted meaning and peace. In India, he learned about spirituality, focus, and simplicity. These lessons helped him later when he faced stress and hard decisions. When he returned to the US, he was no longer just a young man. He had a vision. At 21 years old, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak started a company. They did not have a big office. They worked from the garage of Steve's parents' house. They named the company Apple. Why Apple? Because Steve liked the fruit. It was simple, fresh, and creative. That is what he wanted the company to be. Their first product was the Apple I, a small computer they built with their own hands. It was not perfect, but it was the beginning of something very big. Part 2: Building Dreams and Facing Loss. Apple started very small, but it grew fast. The Apple I gave Steve and Wozniak some money, but it was the Apple II that changed everything. Released in 1977, the Apple II was simple, colorful, and ready to use right out of the box. People loved it. Families, schools, and small businesses began to buy it. Suddenly, Apple became a well-known company. Steve Jobs, only 23 years old, became a millionaire. But for Steve, money was not the goal. He wanted to change the world. He wanted computers to be for everyone, not just for experts. He often said that even a child should be able to use a computer. This dream guided all of his work. In the early 1980s, Steve had another big idea: to create a computer that was not only powerful but also beautiful and friendly. This became the Macintosh. The Mac was special. It introduced the mouse and a graphical interface, so people could click on icons instead of typing long commands. This made computers easier to use and more fun. To launch the Macintosh in 1984, Steve created one of the most famous ads in history. It was called 1984, and it showed Apple as a company that would free people from boring, traditional technology. The ad played during the Super Bowl, and millions of people saw it. The Macintosh launch was dramatic and exciting. But success was not always smooth. Steve was known for being very demanding. He wanted perfection in everything: design, color, packaging, even the way a product felt in your hands. Some people admired his passion, but others found him too strict, stubborn, and hard to work with. Inside Apple, many people started to complain. By 1985, a power struggle broke out between Steve and Apple's board of directors. Shockingly, they decided to remove him from the company he had created. Imagine being fired from your own company. For Steve, it was one of the hardest moments of his life. He felt betrayed and lost. Later, Steve said, "Getting fired from Apple was the best thing that ever happened to me." At first, it was painful, but it gave him freedom to think and create again. Instead of giving up, Steve started a new company called Next. Next focused on making powerful computers for education and business. The machines were advanced but expensive, and they did not sell very well. Still, Next gave Steve a chance to keep dreaming and building. Around the same time, Steve also bought a small animation studio. At first, it was not successful. But Steve believed in it. The studio's name was Pixar. He invested money and time, working with talented artists and technicians. For years, Pixar struggled. Then, in 1995, Pixar released Toy Story, the world's first fully computer-animated movie. It became a huge success, loved by children and adults everywhere. Pixar soon became the top animation studio in the world. While Steve was building next in Pixar, Apple was suffering without him. The company lost its direction. Products were confusing, sales were low, and Apple was close to bankruptcy by the mid-1990s. In 1997, Apple made a bold decision. They invited Steve Jobs back. He returned as CEO, ready to save the company he once built. When he came back, Apple was in chaos. Too many products, no clear vision, and very little money. But Steve was not afraid. He had a plan. His first step was to simplify. He cut many projects and focused on just a few. "We don't need 20 products," he said. "We need 4 great ones." His focus on simplicity gave Apple a clear path again. In 1998, Apple released the iMac. It was colorful, playful, and fun, but also powerful and fast. The iMac was a big hit. Suddenly, people wanted Apple computers again. Steve's magic was back, and Apple was alive once more. Steve also surprised many people by working with Microsoft, Apple's old rival. He made a deal that gave Apple much-needed money and brought Microsoft Office to the Mac. At first, people were angry about this partnership, but Steve explained, "We have to be practical if we want to survive." The deal helped restore trust in Apple. By the late 1990s, Steve was ready to dream bigger. He wanted Apple to be more than a computer company. He wanted it to create simple, powerful, and beautiful products that could change everyday life. Part 3: Changing the World with Innovation. After saving Apple from collapse in the late 1990s, Steve Jobs wanted to go further. He did not want Apple to be just another computer company. He dreamed of Apple becoming a place where technology met art, design, and life itself. He often said, "We're here to put a dent in the universe." In 2001, Apple introduced the iPod. It was small, white, and could hold 1,000 songs in your pocket. The idea was simple but powerful. Before the iPod, people carried CDs or tapes. Music was heavy, limited, and inconvenient. With the iPod, you could carry all your favorite songs anywhere. The iPod quickly became a cultural icon. Everyone wanted one. Teenagers, business people, even grandparents were excited to use it. But the iPod was only the beginning. Steve believed that technology should connect with the heart, not just the mind. He wanted Apple products to feel magical, almost like a friend. That's why he cared so much about small details. How smooth the buttons felt, how easy the menus were, even how the box opened. For him, the entire experience mattered. Then came the iTunes Store. Launched in 2003, it allowed people to buy and download music legally, one song at a time. At first, record companies were unsure, but soon they realized that this was the future. Millions of people began to buy music on iTunes. The music industry changed forever. But Steve's biggest dream was still waiting. For years, he thought about making a phone. Phones were everywhere, but most of them were ugly and hard to use. They had too many buttons, confusing menus, and poor design. Steve wanted something different. He wanted one simple device that could be a phone, a music player, and an internet browser, all in your pocket. In 2007, Steve walked onto the stage in his black turtleneck and jeans. He held a small, shiny device in his hand and said, "Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone." That device was the iPhone. The iPhone was revolutionary. It had a large touchscreen, no physical keyboard, and could run apps. People could swipe, tap, and pinch the screen with their fingers. It felt natural and fun. The iPhone quickly became more than a phone. It became a camera, a GPS, a music player, and a small computer. People could use it for work, play, and everything in between. In 2008, Apple launched the App Store, where developers could create and sell apps for the iPhone. Suddenly, the iPhone was not just one product, it was a platform. There were apps for games, maps, photos, news, fitness, and almost anything you could imagine. The App Store opened a new world of possibilities. Thousands of new businesses started because of it, and millions of people changed the way they lived. Steve Jobs believed that technology should empower people, not confuse them. That belief guided Apple through every step. In 2010, he introduced another product that surprised the world, the iPad. At first, many people laughed. "Who needs a big iPhone?" they asked. But when people tried the iPad, they saw its magic. It was light, simple, and beautiful. You could read books, watch movies, draw pictures, or browse the internet on a screen that felt almost alive. The iPad created a whole new category of devices. By this time, Apple was no longer just a company. It was a movement. The white earphones of the iPod, the glowing Apple logo on laptops, the sleek design of the iPhone all became symbols of creativity, style, and modern life. Steve Jobs had turned Apple into one of the most valuable companies in the world. But more importantly, he had changed how people lived. Music, phones, movies, and communication would never be the same again. Still, behind the success, Steve faced a personal challenge. His health was failing. In 2004, he was diagnosed with a rare form of pancreatic cancer. He tried different treatments, but the disease kept returning. Even as his body grew weaker, his mind remained sharp and full of ideas. People often asked why Steve worked so hard, even when he was sick. His answer was simple: your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. For Steve, every day was a chance to build something meaningful. He wanted to leave a legacy that would last long after he was gone. By the early 2010s, Apple had changed the face of technology. The iPhone, iPod, iPad, and Mac were not just products, they were part of people's lives. And at the center of it all was Steve Jobs, a man who believed that technology could be both useful and beautiful. Part 4: Legacy of a Visionary. By 2010, Steve Jobs was one of the most admired leaders in the world. Apple was no longer just a company that made computers, it was shaping culture, design, and even how people lived their daily lives. The iPod, iPhone, and iPad had become part of millions of homes, schools, and workplaces. But while Apple was stronger than ever, Steve's health continued to decline. Steve had been fighting pancreatic cancer since 2004. At first, doctors thought surgery could save him, and for a while, he seemed to recover. But the disease kept returning. He grew thinner and weaker. Sometimes he appeared on stage looking fragile, but whenever he spoke, his voice carried the same energy and passion. He refused to let illness take away his dreams. In 2005, Steve gave a speech at Stanford University that became one of the most famous speeches in history. Speaking to young graduates, he shared 3 personal stories. About dropping out of college, about being fired from Apple, and about facing death. Each story carried a lesson. From his college days, he learned to trust his curiosity. He told the students how a calligraphy class, which seemed useless at the time, later inspired the beautiful fonts on the Macintosh. From being fired at Apple, he learned that failure could lead to growth. He said that losing Apple freed him to start next in Pixar, which eventually became essential parts of his success. From facing death, he learned that life is short and precious. In that speech, Steve said, "Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life." He encouraged the students to follow their hearts, even when the road was uncertain. His words touched millions of people around the world. Despite his illness, Steve continued to lead Apple. Under his guidance, the company released new versions of the iPhone and iPad, making them faster, thinner, and more powerful. Each product launch became a global event. People lined up for hours, even days, outside Apple stores to buy the newest device. Steve had turned technology into something people didn't just need, they loved. But in 2011, his health grew too weak to continue. In August of that year, Steve resigned as Apple's CEO. He said, "I have always said that if there ever came a day when I could no longer meet my duties and expectations as Apple's CEO, I would be the first to let you know." Unfortunately, that day has come. He handed leadership to Tim Cook, a man he trusted deeply. On October 5, 2011, Steve Jobs passed away at the age of 56. The news shocked the world. Millions of people mourned. Flowers, letters, and messages filled Apple stores across the globe. Presidents, business leaders, and ordinary people all shared stories of how Steve had inspired them. Steve Jobs was not perfect. He could be tough, demanding, and sometimes difficult. But his vision was clear and powerful: to create tools that combine technology and art, tools that could enrich human life. He had turned ideas into reality, again and again. His legacy lives on in every iPhone in someone's pocket, every iPad in a classroom, and every Mac on a desk. But more than the products, Steve's legacy is about courage, creativity, and belief. He showed that one person with passion and vision can change the world. Steve once said, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." He truly believed this, and he lived it. His story reminds us that success is not just about money or fame, but about following your passion, learning from failures, and daring to dream big. Today, Apple continues to thrive, but Steve Jobs remains the heart of its story. His journey. From a young boy in California who loved electronics, to a college dropout, to the founder of Apple, to a man who transformed music, phones, movies, and communication, is one of the greatest stories of our time. And even though Steve is gone, his words still inspire: stay hungry, stay foolish. They remind us to stay curious, keep learning, and never be afraid to take risks. That is the true legacy of Steve Jobs, the man who thought differently, and in doing so, helped the world think differently too.